Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me. My name is Deborah Newcomer, and I'm with CSSI Technologies. Today I'm going to show you SmartList Designer. SmartList Designer is a free tool that's included with your GP package. It was added back in GP 2013 R2. What it does is it allows you to create your own smart lists using any of the data that's anywhere in GP, including third-party products and even other databases that are possibly in SQL. There's another tool that's called SmartList Builder. It's a third-party product from E1 Solutions. It does have a few more capabilities than SmartList Designer, and I'll try to point those out to you as I go through my demo. So let's get started. We're just going to jump right into GP. So to use SmartList Designer, you have to be in the SmartList window. So hopefully you're all familiar with SmartList. There's several ways you can launch it. I have a tool or an icon on my toolbar because I use it quite frequently. If you don't have anything on your toolbar, you can get to it by going to Microsoft Dynamics GP SmartList. That opens our SmartList window. Another way to get to SmartLists are through the navigation list. Like if I go to the sales page, this is called the navigation list. Here's SmartList favorites. And then that's going to bring up just all the smart lists that have been created under the sales folder. So you can see all the different lists I have. I think this takes longer to launch, and it's kind of more difficult to find the list you're looking for. So I prefer to use start in SmartList, because then everything's organized under folders and you can easily see what you're looking for. So I'm going to create a couple of new smart lists today using the designer and then show you some examples of other ones I've created. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat section, and I'm sure we'll have time at the end for additional questions then. So I'm going to create a new smart list, and I'm going to create it under the purchasing. We did a webinar a while back about EFT for payables and adding email addresses to vendors. Well, out of the box, GP doesn't give you a way to show vendor email addresses. So I'm going to create a list to do just that. So now what you do is you click on the folder that you want your new list to be created under, and then you'll see this new button is available. Create a smart list. So I'm going to click on new, give my new list a name. We're going to call this vendor email addresses. You can select your product. Most times you'll be using just the GP product, but you can also use data from any of the other installed products. Third-party products are in the list. So you've got anywhere you can pull data from. I'm going to stay with just GP. And then it defaulted to the purchasing module because that's what I had selected over here, but you can change that if you'd like. Then on the left under the database view, we also have all the list of the products. So you can select any product and then the tables and fields within each product. So we're just going to stick with GP, and then we expand the tables, and then we pick the module we want to work with. So we're working with purchasing. Takes a few seconds to pull up the list of tables because there's so many of them. And the table names are all in alphabetical order. It may not be helpful to you if you don't know what the table names are. Plus, this is a pet peeve of mine, is the maximize button is grayed out, so you cannot make this window any bigger and you can't drag it. So you're stuck with your scroll. But just a bit about how tables are structured. You've got lots of different types of tables. You have setup tables, which is just the setup information for that module or that window. Master MSTR tables, those are your master tables, like the vendor maintenance. We go down to PM vendor master file. So that's all the information that I would see in the vendor maintenance window. You also have transaction tables. Work means that it's a transaction that's in a batch that has not yet been posted. Open tables contain transactions that have been posted but not yet paid. And then history tables contain transactions that have been posted and paid and moved to history. Now, if you work with receivables, you'll know that in the receivables module, transactions that have been paid or fully applied, they don't move to history until you run that paid transaction removal process. So a little difference there between receivables and payables. You can also go to Tools, Resource Descriptions, Tables, and this is just another way to see the list of table names in the different modules. If I go to Purchasing, pretty much seeing the same thing, all my table names. You also have the physical name. This is the name that you see in the SQL database. So if you work with Crystal reports or SQL reporting services, refreshable spreadsheets, this is the table name that you would see in SQL. But what's nice about this window is if I go down to my PM vendor master file, I double click on it, it shows me all the fields within that table. And here again, the physical name, that's the field name you will see in SQL. But you can also get some more information in here, like if I go down to find my vendor status. Some fields have values of numbers, and if you want to know what those numbers represent, most times you can click on Field Info, and then it's going to show you what the values are. So if you're looking at the SQL table for this vendor status field, you're only going to see 1, 2, 3. But here's where you can come in and see what those stand for. Okay, so now I'm going to start building my list. I said I'm going to create a vendor email addresses list. So we're going to start with the PM vendor master file. Click on the plus sign to the left of the table name. It's going to list all the fields in that table. Now these are not alphabetical. I think they're just in the order as they were added when the program was written. So now if you want to select all the fields in this table, you can check the box next to the table name, and then it's going to automatically select all those fields are over here in my selected fields list. Now I know half of these I don't ever use, so I don't want them all in my list. So I'm going to uncheck that and just check the ones I want. So let's do, of course, we want vendor ID and vendor name. Because I'm doing a email address list, I need to include one of my address codes. And when you're doing EFT or payables, you put the email addresses in the remit to, vendor remit to. Now let's also select that vendor status field that I looked at a minute ago. So you just go down and continue checking the fields you want, and you'll see them appear over here. You can always click on this execute query, and it's going to show you that you've hopefully selected the correct fields. Now I'm just going to kind of show you what this has done so far, and then I'll come back. So if I click on OK, I now have a new folder under purchasing called vendor email addresses. So I don't have the addresses in yet, but I just wanted to show you that it creates it under that folder. So now, excuse me, if I want to modify this, my modify is grayed out until I select the folder name, and now my modify button's available. So now I need to add another table. I need to add the internet address table. And just a bit about that first. If I minimize this, let's go take a look at a vendor. So there's our vendor maintenance screen. I want to drill down to my remit to address ID. And then when I add email addresses for the vendor, I have to click on this internet address button. That opens another window. Because it's another window, this information is in a separate table. Now this internet information table is used not only for vendors, but it also stores the email addresses and web page addresses and lots of other information for customers, employees, items, and so on. So this table I'm going to add is not just in the purchasing module because it's shared throughout the whole company, the company table. I hope I didn't confuse you there, but I kind of wanted to explain why I was going to pick the different table. So now if I go back to my modify, so I'm going to add another table under GP, under tables. Well, like I said, it's a company table because it's shared across the modules. So I want to expand the company list. And then I can go down and find my internet addresses table. Scroll down. Here's my internet addresses. Got all that stuff that's in that window. Now I know my email addresses are in this email to address field. So you can see over here, my selected fields, PM vendor master file, that's the table name, and then the field name. And now I have an extra table. When you use multiple tables in a list, you have to join those tables. That's what this relationship section is for. Most times, if you're creating a list with tables within the same module, you can click on this auto link and it's going to link them for you. Now it's going to tell me if I had already created any links or relationships here, this is going to reset them. So that's fine. But now in this case, because I'm using a table that's not in the purchasing module, it's telling me it cannot create the relationship for me. I'm going to have to create it myself. Okay, fine. So I can come in here under relationship, choose my first table, which is the vendor master table. And I need to link the vendor ID. And then you have to select this, how you want to link them. You have three different types of joins. A left join means include all the records that are in this table, regardless of whether there are any matching records in the linked table, that's what I want because I want to see if I have vendors who are missing email addresses. An inner join means it's going to include records only if there's a linked record in each table. And then a cross join means it's just going to include all the records from all the tables. There's really no specific joining. So I'm going to choose my left join. That's usually what I use in most cases. And I have to link it to my other table. And then I have to pick the field name. Now there's no vendor ID because remember this table is used also for customers and employees and other things. So in this case, it's called a master ID. That's why it couldn't auto link because these field names are different. Now I also need to include in this list a second relationship because I need to link the address ID because my vendors have multiple address codes, but I only want to pull in email addresses from my remit to. So I have to link the address code fields. So again, I'm going to start with vendor master. And here again, because this window is so tiny, it's hard to see the full field name, but I just know from creating this before that it's this last address code field. And again, I'm going to do a left join my internet table. And in this case, it's address code. So now I can click on my execute query. I'm going to see if I've joined everything correctly and if I'm going to get data. Sure enough, there's the data I want to see. So I'm reviewing this results preview. You can also click on this T-SQL query, and this is going to show you the SQL query that this designer or this list generated. So if you can play in SQL, write SQL scripts, you can copy this and paste it into SQL Server Management Studio and then work with it there. So let's click on OK. And now we've got our addresses. So this is just another SmartList folder. You can filter, do your search, add columns, save it under the new name. and that will stay under this new folder. Now, when I go to columns, though, and I click on add, there's nothing else there because I only selected these columns when I built my list in the designer. So if you're going to make this list available to other users and you want them to be able to add other fields, then add more, select more fields when you're in the designer, and then they can eliminate whatever they don't want from their favorite. Okay. Now, something else I wanted to point out is when you're in, let's say we're in this regular vendors SmartList. The SmartLists that come with GP, you can double click on a line and it's going to open a window. This is one of the shortcomings of the designer that does not have the ability to drill down to a window. What you can do, and that feature is in the SmartList Builder, the third-party product, which is nice. But I have limited go-tos. That's called a go-to when you can double click and go to another window. When I'm in the SmartList Designer, I can create a go-to, but the go-tos will only take you to another SmartList, or it'll open a navigation list. Those are those lists that are on the left-hand side. You have a module selected, or you can go to a web page. So there's no drill downs from designer lists. They're just lists. That's all they are. All right, so that's a quick run through of the vendor email addresses. Oh, by the way, if you've built a list and you didn't like the results or something wasn't right, you can click on delete it all together and start over. If you have fields in here that you don't want, select a field and then click on the X to delete it. You can also, yes. So I included vendor status. Let's say when I'm creating my list, I don't want to include any vendors that are not active. So you have this filter section where I can filter on a field. So let's filter on vendor status. And you have all these conditions. Is equal to, is not equal to, is any of, more than, less than. So I want to show just those where the vendor status is active. Now this can be a bit tricky too sometimes because I showed you how in the SQL table the status values are 1, 2, 3, but the SmartList Designer is showing me the actual values. Sometimes you can use the actual values, sometimes you have to use the 1, 2, 3. So again, that's kind of a trial and error. I think I may have picked the right one. Let's click on OK. And I should have pointed out, I think I had 108 vendors. I'm now down to 102, so the filter actually did work. And I'm only seeing vendors with a status of active. So that's one. I want to do another one in the sales module this time, because I want to show you how in the SmartList Designer you can include calculated columns. So I'm going to create a new list for customers. And just to show you that under the customers folder, if I just choose one of these like balance and go to columns and add, you actually have in this list summary figures. I get down here, these total numbers, total number of invoices, life to date, last year, or year to date. You also have total costs, total sales. So what I'm going to do then in my new list I'm going to build is I'm going to include sales, sales life to date, and costs life to date, which are up here. And then I'm going to create a profit column. So I'm going to subtract the costs from the sales. That you can't do in the standard list. So let's close out of this one. So I'm going to create my new list under the sales folder. And then my new button is available here. And we're just going to call this customer profit. I'm going to stay in the GP product, and it knows it's in the sales module. Let's expand GP, find the table we need. So I'm going to have to link tables again because that summary information is actually in a separate table than the customer master. So we first got to find, I believe it's RM for receivables management. There's my customer master. So let's take the customer number, customer name, maybe we want the class. That's good enough for now. Let's execute it. Yep, that's what I'm getting. So now we're going to add the customer summaries table. And I think that's up under customer. It's hard to see the whole thing. So we have a customer master summary and a customer period summary. The period summary table gives you a summary of those number of invoices, total sales, total costs, but they're summarized by period and year. So for any given period within any year, you see those numbers. I'm going to go with a master summary because that's the one that has the overall year to date, last year, life to date. We scroll down. We're just going to go with sales life to date. Put it over here, and then costs life to date. Okay, so I've got two different tables, which means I need a relationship created. Now in this case, because they're both from the same module, and if I go up, you can see that the summary table has a customer number field in it too, same as the master. So I should be able to use the auto link. I'm going to click on auto link. Yes, I want to reset whatever's there. And it knew to link those two tables based on that shared field. So that part was easier this time. Let's execute the query, make sure I've got numbers. And you can't always go by the values that appear here. It's just showing you the columns that have been pulled in. So I'm going to click on OK for a minute here, and I'll come back. So there's my list. The formatting isn't always so great either. That's another limitation of the designer. The third-party SmartList Builder tool lets you assign formatting to different columns. And I'll show you kind of how it looks when I do a calculated field. So I want to go back into the designer tool because I need to add a calculated column. So go to modify. So to add a calculated field, that's this little FX button. Click on that. I can add as many different calculated fields as I want, different types. If I go to click on add, I have to give it a name. I'm going to call this profit. What type of field is it? Currency field, date, integer, long integer, string, or text. This is currency. And now these are the two tables I have in my list. And I'm going to build an expression down here, which is my calculation. So the field I want to start with, actually both of them are in this master summary table. And then this lists all the columns that are in that table, not just the ones I've selected in my list. So you can do calculations based on fields that you're not displaying. So we're going to go down and find our sales, total sales, life to date. So you double click on it, and that field gets added in the expression. Now this gets a little tricky. You have to pay attention to where your cursor is. Like my cursor is blinking there at the beginning. I need to move it to the end so I can add to my expression. Excuse me. So now I need to do a function. I've got lots of different functions, arithmetic, text functions, kind of like the formulas that you use in Excel. Got lots of date and time functions, math, and aggregate. So I'm just going to do a simple arithmetic function. I'm going to do the minus sign, and I double click. put my minus sign, but here again, my cursor stayed in front of the minus sign, so I have to click the end. And now I can go back to table fields and add the second field that I want, which is total cost life to date, and double click. So there's my expression. If you forget to move your cursor, you can click on this X to delete the expression altogether and start over. I think it looks good, so I'm going to click on save, and then it tells me that the calculated field is valid. So if I had anything out of order, I would get some kind of message saying that it's invalid, and sometimes what's wrong, just whether it's right or not. So now there's my calculated field, and if I want to include it in my list, it has to be highlighted here. So if you don't highlight it and just click on OK and you don't see it, then you know you have to come back into that little FX button, select it, and then OK. And now I have my calculated field here. Let's execute it. Here again, you can't always go by the values you see here. It's just my column's going to appear. Click on OK. So there's that formatting issue. I don't know why. I think if the values are in GP, they'll get $signs, but you don't have the commas, you know, the thousand separator, and you don't really have any formatting here. I think I've seen where there may be some way you can do a calculated field to format this, but hopefully in most cases you're creating a list maybe to send it to Excel. Click on the Excel button, and then you can just do your formatting here as usual. Format cells, currency. So again, the SmartList Builder third-party tool does let you do these formatting. So there I've just created 2 new lists. Not too painful. Again, it's trial and error till you find the right table, the right fields. So now, once you've got your list built, how do you grant users access to it? If you have a user that's set up as power user, then power users automatically have access to the SmartList Designer, and they have access to all new lists built. But anybody who's not a power user will need security granted. So let's say you have a user and you want them to be able to use the SmartList Designer tool. Then what you want to do is go to Administration and into User Security. Excuse me. Into User Security, and you can assign SmartList Designer. Oh wait, okay. Here's what I want to do. I want to pick a user. I forget who has access to what, but we're just going to pick a user. And I'm working in my test company. So now if you want to see just the roles assigned to this user, click on this Display Selected Roles. So, okay, so this is Chris. He is only an AP clerk. So I can double click on this role. Let's say I want all my AP clerks to be able to use the SmartList Designer. I can double click on the role. And then what you need to do is the SmartList Designer is part of the system. And these are all the tasks within the system module, system setup or admin module. But somewhere down here is SmartList Designer. So now I can add that task to that role, and then anybody that's assigned AP clerk will be able to get to the SmartList Designer. So that's getting them to the designer. Now, maybe you don't want everyone to be able to get into the designer and make changes to lists, but you want them to be able to view the lists that somebody else has designed. So to do that, then we want to just grant them access to individual smart lists. So if we go, actually we can stay here in this AP clerk. So let's say I want everybody that's an AP clerk to see that new vendor email addresses list I created. So let's first change this back to purchasing and show me all the tasks that the AP clerk has. So these are all the tasks. So what you can do, I think the easiest thing to do is to add this new smart list to one of these existing tasks. So like if they're able to view payables transactions, we could add it there. If they're able to view all purchasing reports, we could add it there. So, however it pertains to you, find a task, double click on the task, and then within here, we can assign, we have to change the product to SmartList because all SmartLists are under the SmartList product. The type is SmartList object, and then the series is also SmartList objects. So now you're going to see down here all SmartLists, the ones that came with GP and the ones that are built with Designer. So you have to know the name of it. And mine was what? Vendor email addresses. So there's the new list. So until you come in and add that list to a task and a role, nobody's going to be able to see it except power users. Okay, that's security. I'm not going to save any of my changes. I'm going to go back into SmartList to just show you a few other examples. Some other lists that I've built that might be helpful is under company. I created a list for user security roles. If you have lots of users and maybe you have multiple companies, this is a quick and easy way to see which user has access to which role in which company. So I have this filtered on my test company because that's the name of the company that I play with. But you can create multiple lists. Like I said, even though it was built with Designer, you still have all the other options to do searches and create favorites and add columns. So that's one that's kind of handy. Another one is back again to EFT setups. When you're using the EFT for payables and you set up your vendors for EFT, there's really no list out of the box to see which ones are set up. So I created a list in the Designer for EFT vendors, or I can see who all I have set up with bank information. Because as soon as you go into that EFT setup window for vendors, then they're considered set up for EFT. I think I have my list. So I'm only showing those vendors that where the bank type is not equal to blank. So I only want to see those who are currently set up. But I could click on that or clear, and then I could see all my vendors and who's set up for EFT or not. Another SmartList that's lacking, if you're running payroll in GP, the payroll lists are really just lists of employees, historical transactions. There's really no lists for what pay codes may be assigned, what deductions or benefits are assigned. So I used the Designer to create this list called employee pay rates. And then I had it filtered for just the hourly code. Of course, this is not one you want to share with all users, but it's handy to have this in a list. Also, while I'm in here, there's this import-export or export-import button. So as you're playing around with this, if you're having trouble finding the table name you need or the fields, feel free to send us an email. You can email me directly, dnewcomer@cssi.com. You can send an email to our support address, which is just support@cssi.com. Because what you can do is if you've created a list, but you're kind of stuck, you can click on the export button, and that's going to export your list. You select which one you want, insert it, and then give it a file name, pick a location, and put in a file name. And then you can email that list to us, and then we can import it in our Designer and take a look at it and hopefully help you figure out what's wrong. Usually, when your data is not being returned correctly, it's usually an issue with the relationships, the joins. Or it could just be you're having trouble finding the right tables, but we're always happy to help you. So that's a quick run through of the designer. Do we have any questions? Okay. Well, if we don't have any questions, like I said, feel free to contact us if you need any help. We will be sending everyone a link to the webinar in the next day or two. So have fun creating your lists and have a great day. Thank you.